to the CISA course series. If you have been following along, we have already covered the foundation of information systems auditing in Domain 1 and explored IT governance and management in Domain 2. Now, we enter Domain 3, information systems acquisition, development, and implementation. So, this domain is where technology meets execution. It's about how an organization plans, builds, and deploy IT systems, and how, as an auditors, ensure those systems are secure, reliable, and aligned with the business goals. This domain accounts for about 12% of the CISA exams, and it's deeply practical. Okay. In real world audits, this is where you will actually evaluate everything from how new systems are selected and developed to how changes are controlled and tested before going live. By the end of this session, you'll not only know the phases of system development, you'll understand how an auditor thinks during each one. Okay, so moving on to our section 1. Yeah. So section 1, understanding system acquisition. Okay, when a company needs a new system, say a financial accounting system or cloud based HR portal, it doesn't just buy software randomly. The process begins with a business case and a feasibility study. Okay, so moving on to what business case is and some details around business case. So business case is a document that defines the why certain application or uh, why certain software is needed in a system. So it answers what business problem are we solving, what's the cost, risk, and expected return, and also does this align with the strategic objectives of a business. Okay, so what would you do as an as an auditor? So your first question would be, was there a proper business justification? Yeah. So moving on to our next portion, which is feasibility study. So what does feasibility studies actually covers? So it, at the very holistic level, this covers technical, financial, operational, and legal aspects. Okay, so let's say for an instance, can the current IT infrastructure support the new system? Are there hidden licensing costs? Or will the new solution comply with the data privacy laws? Okay. After feasibility studies, after you evaluate these questions, there's a vendor selection and RFP process. So organizations typically go through a request for proposal process where vendors submits the bids. Okay, so bids includes like what their solution actually gives and what would be the cost of their solution, and what are the like the more descriptive on the solution. So this is a place where actually the risk hides. Okay, so the risk could be the bias in selection, or let's say a weak evaluation criteria, or incomplete security requirement. Okay, so auditor in this section actually focuses on, was vendor evaluation was fair, and was it documented or is it documented, were technical and security requirements are the part of the contract, were SLAs defined for uptime, response time, and data protection. Okay, so just story around it. So in one multinational audit, a CRM vendor was selected based purely on the price. Later, the system couldn't integrate with the existing databases, causing data duplication and loss. And that's why CISA emphasizes due diligence, which is the cheapest option, isn't always the best one. Okay, so moving on to the section 2, which is system development life cycle, or what we say in abbreviative term SDLC. So this will include the developer coding, flow diagrams, project boards, etc. etc. So now let's say the system have been acquired, it enters the development, and that's where the system development lifecycle, or SDLC, comes into the play. Okay, so what is SDLC? So SDLC is a structured process that ensures quality and security at every stage of development. Let's go through each phase with auditor's perspective in mind. Let's try to understand what role the auditors play and how you should think during this SDLC process as an auditor. Okay, so the first phase is initiation and planning. Okay, so the purpose is to set the foundation. Auditors verify that objectives are clearly defined, roles and responsibilities are assigned, risks are identified early, approval to proceed is documented. Just sharing an example which I faced as an auditor. So, a public sector IT project started without a formal charter. Months later, dispute arose over scope and ownership, causing delays. So, by that, what I learned is that without a proper charter, accountability disappears. So, it is very important for a person or an auditor to document the proper charter and document the accountability, the roles and responsibilities at the very first place. Okay, then moving to our next phase, which is feasibility and requirements analysis. So this phase defines what the system should do. Requirements must be specific, measurable, and validated with users. In this phase, so the auditors ensure the functional and non-functional requirements like performance, security, and scalability of the solution are documented. Requirements are approved by stakeholders and traceability exists. Every requirement should map to a test case later. An exam tip: if requirements aren't traceable to design and testing, the control weakness is inadequate documentation and validation. Okay, moving on to the next phase, which is design phase, and this is the phase where architecture is created. The architecture outlines the data flow, the process maps, and the controls are designed. As an auditor, they assess whether the security by design is being followed, whether segregation of duties is enforced, which means that developers shouldn't have the production access, database and application design reviews are conducted. This is where input validation, encryption mechanism, and logging controls are embedded into the system blueprint and not added later. Moving on to the next phase, which is development phase, where actually the coding begins. And as an auditor, we look for the use of secure coding standards like OWASP, whether the code is being reviewed and tested by the peers, then proper use of version control systems like Git or SVN or Bitbucket, then restricted access to the source code repositories. So in a fintech startup, developer committed API keys directly in a source code. These were later exposed publicly on GitHub. A quick audit of version control access could have been prevented a multi-million dollar breach. Okay, so this is why, as an auditor, it is very important for us to do our job, making sure that all of the things which we discussed earlier in this phase is being followed. Else, definitely, it may create some kind of an hassle or some kind of a challenge afterwards. So make sure that the process is documented, the vendor selection goes through hard due diligence, then a secure coding practice is being followed. We have uh, established change management process where actually the code is being reviewed by the peers and tested by the peers. Also making sure that all the developers shouldn't have the access to the production code, because this is being defined in the segregation of duties, and only the let's say the team lead or manager of that project is having the access, and not every developer should have the access to the production. Then making sure that the valid version controlling system is in place, making sure that the version is being controlled by the people in the higher management or not by the low experienced developer. So yeah, moving on to the next phase, which is testing phase. And truly speaking, this is the most critical stage in software development life cycle. And as an auditor, you may review the unit testing or type of testing auditors may review, which is unit testing. Does each component work correctly? Does it producing the the output as expected? Then in within integration testing, do system interacts properly? Note down the deviations in the output, making sure that those deviations are being considered and redeveloped, and again the integration testing is done, making sure that the system is actually interacting in a proper manner and how it had been defined within the documentation. Then comes the user acceptance testing. In this testing, as an auditor, you need to make sure that does the system meets the business needs. Then within regression testing, does the new code break the old functionality? Let's say like we had implemented something new, but after that implementation, the old functionality of the application is not working. So in that case, definitely it is going to affect the solution, and thus the business is getting affected. So as an auditor in regression testing, you need to actually test or take in the consideration, or making sure that the new code is not breaking the old functionality. Then comes the security testing. So as an auditor, you will monitor whether the vulnerabilities which have been found during the SAS.AST scan are addressed, or is it still open. If it's still open, it means that it needs to be addressed before moving into the production, making sure a security or making sure a vulnerability free system. So an auditor review test plans, results, and defect logs. Just one example: if testing is skipped or incomplete, the system may meet deadlines but fail in the production. So, as an auditor, make sure that before moving to the production, each and every functionality of the solution is being logged, is been documented, and have been passed the controls. Then moving on to our next phase, which is phase 6, implementation phase. This phase involves go live preparation, deploying the system into the production. So, as an auditor, will review go live approval by the management, data migration testing and reconciliation, rollback plans in case of failure, and the training of the end users. So, during a payroll migration, mismatched date format caused salary miscalculations. A proper data reconciliation test could have caught it. Just a story. Then we'll move on to our next phase, which is phase 7, maintenance and review. Now, the system enters steady state operations. So, as an auditor, we'll check the patch and the version management, making sure that the patch is being applied and the version is getting updated, making sure that the addressed vulnerabilities have been closed. and that's where actually the patching and version management is required. Then periodic review of the enhancements of the solution. Then will as an auditor will also check for the access rights, making sure that those rights remain appropriate after role changes. In short, even after go live, the auditor's works continues. Okay, moving on to our next section, which is project management and governance. Okay, now, so the good IT projects are managed and not provisioned or not improvised. Okay, auditors assess how projects are governed and tracked. So the key controls would include defined project charter and governance framework, periodic progress and risk reports, change request processes, budget monitoring and stakeholders communication. Okay, framework like PMBOK, Prince 2 and Agile Scrum defined structured project practices. So there's an audit case I wanted to discuss in this section. So in a government audit, a software project went 11 months over schedule because scope was redefined 3 times without documented approvals. So what does this implies? Yeah. So it implies that weak change control is equal to the delayed or governance failure. Yeah. So moving on to our next section, which is application controls. Now let's zoom in on the controls within the application, the ones that keep data accurate and reliable. So type of application controls. First is input controls. Validate the data before processing. Example, range checks, completeness checks. Then processing controls. Ensure transactions are authorized and processed correctly. Example would be sequence checks, run to run totals. Then output controls. Protect report accuracy and confidentiality. Example, distribution logs, output encryption. Then integrity controls. Maintain the data consistency. And how it can be achieved? It can be achieved by, for example, the checksums and file totals. So what happened? A retail ERP accepted negative inventory quantities, causing reporting errors. One missing input validation check leads to millions in discrepancies. So auditor must know which control types applies where. Okay. So moving on to our next section, which is change management and configuration control. So no system remains static. Updates, patches, and improvements are constant and consistent. That's where change management comes in. So as an auditor, we verify that every change is authorized and tested before implementation. Changes are logged in a ticketing system if ticketing system is not available in small scale organization, typically in startups. So auditor will make sure that there are at least an email approval process in place where the changes and approval is being documented, and it can be used as a as a proof in showing that even without ticketing system, the company or an organization is following the change management process. Then emergency changes are reviewed after execution. Code version control prevent unauthorized overrides. So, as an example, a developer deployed an emergency fix directly into production, accidentally overwriting the customer data. If change logs and version controls were enforced, rollback would have been simple. Yeah. So moving on to the next section, which is implementation and post implementation review. After go live of an application, auditor performs a post implementation review, basically to confirm the system meets the business requirement, data have been migrated correctly, users have received the trainings, and operational processes and SLAs are defined. They also assess whether the lesson learned were captured for future projects. Okay, so here the lesson learned is basically like what were the challenges, and let's say what was the discrepancies, and from those discrepancies or challenges, what as a team, a developer or a management had learned, making sure that the same issue is not no like not coming in further in futures, or they at least have a plan to mitigate that those particular challenge if they they noticed, or they usually notice in their future deployments or anything. So that is what lesson learned actually captures, making sure that next time the process is more even smoother than how it was in this time. Okay, so moving on to our next section, which is basically the exam tips and wrap up. Yeah, so let's summarize the essence of domain 3. Auditors play a vital role throughout the SDLC, and not just at the end. As an auditor, documentation, testing, and change control are your strongest evidence. Understand control objectives and not just the process. Align every audit observation to business risk. That's what ISACA expects. Okay. So next up, we'll cover domain 4, information system operations, maintenance and support, where we'll move from system build to day-to-day operations. So until then, stay curious and stay secure. Thank you guys for watching, and in case you guys have any doubt, kindly post in comment. I may not be available every time, but I'll spare some time during the weekend to answer all your question and queries, and see you in the next video. Thanks everyone.